Hello. Welcome to the Making of Madrid podcast about life and history and culture in Madrid. And it's presented by me, Felicity Hughes, a journalist and tour guide. You may have seen my work in the Financial Times or Lonely Planet. I do this podcast/vlogcast as a bit of a labor of love. So if you're enjoying it, please do help support the project going on into the future by either buying my book, which is called Quiet Madrid, and it's a guide to the hidden spaces in Madrid, or you can buy one of my voice map tours. And this second part of a two-parter episode on Muslim Madrid I'm recording it, because I just launched a medieval Madrid tour. So in the first episode, I began to cover the history of Muslim Madrid, talking a bit about archaeological finds and why there's this idea of there's been this sort of counter narrative. First with Felipe II, who didn't like the idea that Madrid was a city that had been founded by a Muslim ruler, and tried to say that it was the Greeks, and other people tried to say that perhaps it was the Romans, but in fact this isn't true because there was never a Roman settlement, just a Roman villa quite far from where ground zero of Madrid is. But now we're going to get to the city walls. So I mentioned in the last episode that Madrid was taken in 1083 by Alfonso VI of Castile. And basically, when he took it, we're not quite sure how the city fell. It could have been in 1083, it could have been in 1085. We're pretty sure Madrid wasn't his grand prize. I mean, we're absolutely sure, Toledo was the grand prize, which has a much longer, richer history stretching all the way back to the Romans, the Visigoths. It was a center of education. It was very important. Madrid was it had grown. So initially it had been a fortress town, and that fortress town had grown. It now had a hammam, a medina, all these things, and thriving agriculturally. And we'd say, about 3,000 people when he took it. And people often talk about the reconquest of Madrid, the Reconquista, and a lot of historians are kind of uncomfortable with this term Reconquista because, in fact, can you say that the later Christians were the same people as the Visigoth? Well, maybe not. The population had begun to mix quite a lot. A lot of North African Berbers had come up into the Iberian Peninsula and mixed with the population. The Visigoths were totally different people. So the term Reconquista is difficult, and especially difficult when we come to talk about Madrid, because Madrid, it was never a Christian territory. So Alfonso tried to prove this by saying that he found a statue of the Virgin Mary in the walls when he invaded. In fact, this is highly unlikely to be true because we don't think there was any kind of settlement. And the walls themselves really point to this 9th century fortress built by Mohammed I of Cordoba. Now, when they discovered these, they made a park in the 2000s. And initially it was very much sort of celebrated that this was part of Madrid's rich past. And if you go to the park, you can see there are panels explaining all about the history of Madrid. And I urge you to go and visit the garden of Mohammed I of Cordoba, because you can read all about this wonderful history. You can go and walk underneath the walls. But it's a little bit difficult because then when it got a revamp again, the rules for the opening of the park became weird. Like, this park is never open on a weekday. And I do not know why. I spoke to, one moment, I need to find the name. I spoke to Daniel Gil, professor of Arabic and Islamic studies at Madrid's Complutense University, when I wrote a piece for Al Jazeera about the origins of Madrid. And he had been consulted on the plants that they had there that would be very typical to Al-Andalus. But he was livid because there's no proper signposting for this park. So you get lots and lots of signposting for the crypt of the Cathedral of the Almudena, but you don't get signposting for the Madrid's original city walls. And the signposts, the panels that there are haven't been updated. They're all cracked and horrible and old. And yeah, the park is closed on weekdays, and he really believes this is to do with whoever's in charge at the time not wanting this fact of the origins, Islamic origins of Madrid, to be trumpeted from the rooftops. So yeah, the next thing that happened with this wall, of course, was that there are sections of it all around this sort of high up position where the Cathedral of the Almudena is, the royal palace is. So they built this brand new gallery that was inaugurated a couple of years ago called the Galería de Colecciones Reales, which is a fantastic gallery, by the way. Do go and visit it. And when they built it, of course, they stumbled upon more remains of the original Muslim wall and tons and tons and tons of artifacts showing a rich past that points to Madrid only having been originally a Medina, a fortress, an Almudena, which then grew into a town with a Medina, by the way. So they have this wall, all this evidence. Everything gets shipped off to warehouses, some of it to Alcalá de Henares Museum. As far as I know, nothing has been sent to the Museo de San Isidro, which it should be because that's the museum of the origins of Madrid. And then they found something else alongside all this stuff, something that the right-wing press got really, really excited about. Now, let me just check my notes for a second. So in 2009, on Valentine's Day, they found what they believed was a Visigoth skeleton. And the chief archaeologist at the time was a lady called Esther Andreu. And she was interviewed by El Mundo and ABC, who are right-wing press, and they proudly proclaimed that the existence of Valentín, which they nicknamed Valentín because it was St. Valentine's Day, was evidence that there had been a Visigoth settlement in Madrid. Now, before the creation of Madrid. So this was so important to the right-wing press because this, of course, means that Madrid would have originally been a Christian city. A Christian settlement, not a city because it was much smaller. But there was nothing beyond this skeleton. And when I went to do this piece about the origins of Madrid and talk to various people about it, they were very, very dismissive of this story. And in fact, they were really angry. And they never named her directly, but I think they were really angry with Esther Andreu. But I have my doubts about whether or not she was the one responsible for all this misinformation. And unfortunately, when I was writing the piece, she was in India. But I kept trying to contact her, and eventually, just before she arrived back at the 11th hour, she told me categorically, I had never said that this meant that Madrid had been a Visigoth settlement. I just said that this skeleton, quite rightly indeed, predated all these Islamic remains. But she didn't say anything much beyond that. And everybody else said, what does a single skeleton prove? Probably a single skeleton just proves that somebody was perhaps a wandering shepherd and died here. So I can't believe that this narrative of the skeleton still comes up, because I got into a conversation with someone about this online before I wrote the piece, and they were categorically stating that there was hard evidence for a Visigoth settlement. And now I've talked to the experts, and there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever for this. It's a story that is really, really tenuous. You know, you can't say that one skeleton, a single skeleton, is evidence for any kind of settlement. So yeah, this is absolutely 100% not true. One of the people who was particularly incensed by this story, by the way, is Álvaro Soler, who I interviewed. He's the archaeologist and curator responsible for the city wall exhibit at the Galería de Colecciones Reales. Now, I also sensed that he was annoyed about something else, because there are no artifacts, nothing that was found beyond the wall in the Galería de Colecciones Reales. There is a really fantastic video, which I think that Soler is probably responsible for, because he was incredibly interested in this time. In fact, he was the one who told me about Felipe creating this myth of there having been like the Greeks in Madrid before anything, so he could have this like classical antiquity sort of pedigree to Madrid, which it really doesn't have. But yeah, you go to the Galería de Colecciones Reales, and it's a great way of getting to know about the origins of Madrid, and they've done some really great kind of reconstructions of how Madrid might have looked, how the city sort of developed. You know, you get the Alcazar, and then you get it burning down, and then you get the Bourbons and everything like that. But yeah, it's so weirdly sort of thin on the ground beyond that. There's just the wall, which is illuminated, and you can look at it, but no other context for it. In fact, you have to go over to La Latina, which was the area that then became what's known as the Morería. So I was saying that Alfonso took the city in 1083, and the social order then switched round. So you once had Christians at the bottom of society, Muslims at the top. Then you now get Christians at the top of society, so they get to live within the safety of some city walls. Muslims at the bottom, and they go over to live in La Latina, which is also called La Morería. Now, the Morerías are areas where Muslims are forced to settle. There's one in Valencia as well. And they were allowed to pretty much be self-governing. Things were a lot more tolerant in early Christian rule. I go into this a lot. If you're interested in all this history, check out my voice map tour of medieval Madrid. But yeah, they all settled in La Latina. And La Latina is another area that has a rich archaeological history of the Muslim times when Muslims lived in this area. So the Museo de San Isidro itself, they had to sort of, there was an original building there, which they had to knock down. Only the Renaissance courtyard remains, which is beautiful, by the way. It's in my little book, Quiet Madrid. So if you want to know some nice quiet spaces to hang out in, that's one of them that I list. When they knocked down this old building, they found lots and lots of silos and wells. And the Muslims were great hydro engineers. And just outside on the Plaza de los Carros, which is also called Plaza Puerta de Moros, Morería, sorry, there's lots and lots of little waterways underground. And they're marked by little brass things. So that's actually an example of Madrid fully celebrating its Muslim heritage. There are panels explaining about the canats, which are waterways underground, and how all this stuff was channeled. But yeah, it's interesting to me, this thing about the wells and the silos in the Museo de San Isidro, because if you go to the Museo de San Isidro and walk around, they will not let you pass until you've gone to have a look at the well of San Isidro. Now, San Isidro was a saint who we think lived around the time of the so-called Reconquista. I'm saying that kind of sarcastically because, there wasn't a reconquest of anything. But when Alfonso took the city, San Isidro is thought to have lived around this time. And his mummified body is actually kept in a coffin nearby the Museo de San Isidro. But yeah, he's associated with lots and lots of miracles. And one of the most important is the miracle of the well, in which it's said that his wife dropped her baby into a well. He was away at work. He came back, they prayed, the waters raised, and the baby was saved. In fact, it's not and now they're calling this the well of San Isidro. But there's another well out in the Biblioteca de Vargas, which is also thought to be the well of San Isidro. And I'm told there's a third well, and I need to track down where that third well is. But yet there's no real evidence that this was a particular well of San Isidro. More likely, I think it was a well built by Islamic artisans around the time of the Morería. And the celebration of it as the well of San Isidro is a little bit disingenuous. But never mind. I mean, everyone loves San Isidro because that's when we celebrate his saint's day with lots of parties in Madrid. In fact, it's the best time to come to Madrid in May during the fiestas de San Isidro. In any case, I think I'm going to end this episode here. The issue of Muslim Madrid is one that I come back to time and time again. There's a lot to be said about Muslim Madrid and medieval Madrid. Religious tolerance, which went both ways, I think is important to add. The Muslims were rather tolerant of Christian practices. The early Christians after that were rather tolerant of Muslim practices. There's a lot to unpick. But I don't want to give everything away on my podcast. If you're interested and you want to walk the history of it all, which some of it is hard to see because, again, there's this issue with signposting, then please do go and buy my tour, which is Medieval Madrid on VoiceMap. And I think I might be doing a giveaway because I've got some vouchers for people to try the tour for free. So check out my Instagram account. That's The Making of Madrid again. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Bye-bye.